The history of Mansa Musa really permeates knowledge concerning African history for the common observer. He's one of the most known kings in African history. Even though my series usually focuses on unique events outside of the continent, I thought I'd make an exception for the wealthy Mandinka ruler. What up, African world? It's Home Team here, and welcome back to another video of African history, culture, and worldview. By supporting this channel on Patreon, you're helping in the creation of these videos and supporting this content. If you'd like access to full courses and sources, or you simply want to show your support, you may do so by clicking the Patreon link in the description box below. Some scholars believe that Mansa Musa was indeed the wealthiest human being the world has ever known. It's no surprise because Africa is one of the wealthiest continents in terms of natural resources, and that's why it became a target for the rest of the world. Even though the discovery of African history is still in its infancy as it concerns popular culture, Mansa Musa still remains the exception. His fame in medieval times has translated very well into the modern era, and that city he revitalized, Timbuktu, became a legendary city, one that gets frequent reference in popular culture. Timbuktu is no doubt the most popular medieval African city, and perhaps the most popular African city period. The Mandinka king really overshadowed a lot of what was going on in the early 14th century. His reign began in 1312 and ended in 1337. So let's talk about what else was happening in Africa during that time. Now, a lot was actually going on in and around 1300 during the life of Mansa Musa, and just 12 years before he came to the throne. In North Africa, the Moroccan city of Massa was said to be in its final stages of flourishing, perhaps a perfect segue into the dominance of Timbuktu. For almost 1,000 years, trade moved over routes from the Niger River all the way to the city of Massa. Massa became a major economic center as a result of the trans-Saharan trade that expanded into other goods well beyond the trade in gold and salt. According to an account by Ibn Hakal, Massa grew in economic power due to shifting trade routes. At one time, trade between Egypt and the Wagadu Empire took a direct route across the desert, but because of the harsh conditions, this route was abandoned. Instead, caravans passed through the Maghreb to Massa and then headed south across the Sahara. In West Africa, during the life of Mansa Musa, the Wolof people began to migrate into the area of present-day Senegal and Gambia and established the Wolof Empire around 1300. The Wolof system of government, based on individual wealth and the preservation of personal privilege and power, became one of the most autocratic systems of government in West Africa. Hereditary griots sang the praises of the divine leader and their aristocratic masters, and transmitted the history of the people from generation to generation. In northern Nigeria, Islam began to take more precedence among the Hausa people. In the 1300s, Muslim missionaries from Mali are said to have advanced Islam into the Hausa states, and following the familiar pattern of conversion in West Africa, the upper classes of Hausa became Muslim, perhaps to benefit more from their trading relationships. In Eastern Africa, a very important political event began to take form in Ethiopia. When Yakuna Amlak, the founder of the Abyssinian Empire, died in 1285, his son Yagba Seyon took over and reigned until 1294. However, there were many power struggles among his descendants during the period following his reign. Because of this family fighting, a new rule was introduced in 1300. It stated that all males tracing descent from Yakuna Amlak, except the reigning emperor and his sons, were to be held in a mountaintop prison. This prison was almost impossible to reach, and it was closely guarded by soldiers who were loyal to the king. Most kings followed this practice until the early 16th century, when the prison was destroyed. The royal prison helped solve a problem that plagued the Solomonic line through its long history, constant fighting over succession among those claiming royal lineage. This was a very important moment in African history because succession disputes plagued many African empires, making them easy prey for invasion, foreign and domestic. The Ethiopians were able to figure out a way to peacefully solve this issue for quite some time, significantly reducing the likelihood of violent civil wars. Also in East Africa during this time, the Tutsi, who were always a pastoralist or cattle-raising people, began to settle throughout present-day Rwanda and Burundi, an area that had been occupied by the Hutu people for centuries. Because they possessed cattle and had better weaponry, they slowly gained political control over the Hutu. The Mwami was at the top of the Tutsi political, economic, and social pyramid, presiding as king in Tutsi society. The Mwami controlled all affairs of the state and eventually took possession of all Hutu land. Therefore, a contractual relationship called the Ubuhake was formed between the Hutu and the Tutsi. Under this system, many Hutu people became indentured servants in exchange for the use of Tutsi land and cattle. This feudal system was so strong that it remained intact for quite some time. In Zambia, an economically complex society had evolved by 1300. Excavations at Ngombe Elede, an archaeological site near the Kafu and Zambezi rivers, uncovered distinct class differences among burial practices. Ngombe Elede is thought to have been a small commercial state or principality whose chief item of trade was salt. Some of those individuals buried, presumably the nobles, had elaborate jewelry incorporating gold, glass beads, and seashells. These would have had to have come through trade from as far away as Zimbabwe and the east coast of Africa. Speaking of the eastern coast of Africa, the magnificent Swahili palace of Husini Kubwa was built during the life of Mansa Musa in the early 1300s. The Swahili palace was located in Tanzania. The palace was commissioned by Sultan Al-Hassan Ibn Suleiman because upon his visit to Mecca, he became inspired by the architectural wonders he witnessed, and he wanted to emulate that back in Africa. It became one of the largest buildings in Africa during its time. Also on the Swahili coast, the island of Pate was founded as a city-state, along with Faza, Siu, and Shanga. Pate formed an Indian Ocean trading empire that exchanged gold, captives, and ivory for cloth and weapons. And for our final event, in Central Africa during the life of Mansa Musa, the Kanem Empire began waning, setting the stage for a civil war later in the century. But that wouldn't be the end of Kanem. This civil war only made it a stronger empire, an event that is extremely rare. It even expanded its borders after the civil unrest. That's why I consider the Kanem Empire to be the greatest empire in all of African history. Well, I'm Ola, guys. Hopefully I gave you a decent picture of what was going on in Africa during the life of Mansa Musa. If you like these videos and want to help in its continued production, consider supporting the home team on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.